She left to bring her to school.
Is everything okay?
Has she gone missing before?
Not in a long time.
Ma'am?
So Kate and Carolyn, congratulations on You Are Not My Mother. I love this movie event immensely.
Oh, cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're very excited because we have our DIF screening tonight, which is our first big Irish screening. And so it's going to be very fun. Everyone's very excited. Yeah, so it's going to be a good one.
Very exciting stuff. Yeah. I suppose, Kate, my first question actually was going to be for yourself. Where did the idea for the story actually come from? Because it's really something that's quite unique.
Yeah, well, I've always been fascinated with like Irish folklore, and I love the kind of idea that when folklore stories are told to you when you're a kid, they're told to you as if they're real. So it's kind of like you grow up sort of believing these things are maybe, like, I still kind of believe it. I think as well, even in Irish kind of history, you have like, motorways built around fairy forts and stuff so that they're not kind of interfering. And I think it's still so much a part of our culture, which I really love. And I think, that was always just really interesting to me. And then I read lots about it, and I wanted to make something that felt modern and set in a modern Ireland and a modern Dublin, but kind of had the echoes of that, all those folklore stories that you'd hear. And that it felt like it was really happening in our modern day world. So that was kind of one aspect. But then also, thematically, I wanted to explore the ideas of, being a young person coming of age in a family that have past trauma and have these things kind of coming up for you again as somebody coming of age in that family, and, struggles with mental health and confronting that as a young person when you're probably too young to kind of make sense of it, and like having to grow up quite fast in that kind of environment. So that was something I want to explore as well. And then the two sort of just really complemented each other nicely, the ideas, the folklore stories, and then the more kind of modern themes that I wanted to explore. Yeah, so it just sort of came together that way, I suppose.
And for yourself, Carolyn, when you would have gotten the script for this movie, what was it that was kind of the most immediately striking aspects to it, I suppose, the ones that made you think that this is a project I really want to be involved with?
Exactly the way that Kate described it, that beautiful merging of mental health and Celtic mythology. It was clear in the script when I read it, and I just loved what she did by merging those two things together. I thought it was incredibly smart. I thought it was really sensitively and beautifully written, with a lot of respect for the issue of mental health, and just telling it through this metaphor. I just thought it was beautiful. I loved it. Yeah, so that's primarily what attracted me, or what bounced off the page for me when I read it. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's really interesting that you both kind of described mental health and mental illness as something that's very interwoven in the script, because that's something that really struck me too. And I found it really interesting, particularly in relation to horror, because you think about, there have been other movies that have kind of portrayed mental illness, but have kind of ended up villainizing it when it's handled in horror. So I'm thinking of a movie like, say, Misery, or more recently, the film Split, with James McAvoy, that was quite criticized for its portrayal of, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, dissociative identity disorder. I hope that's correct. So was that something that you were kind of actively thinking about, both of you, and wanted to kind of redress, I suppose?
Yeah, I think, it was always important to me that it was treated with respect. And I think, I feel like you could almost think that it was kind of, the idea is that it is almost like the mental illness is represented by a monster in the film in a way. So, you could see it as being demonized, but it was really important to me to strike the balance that it wasn't. And that, because, the film is very much through the protagonist, Shar, the person coming of age, is POV, and it's her perception of her mother and seeing her mother. So, for me, it was really about the fear you feel as a young person when you see that your parents aren't infallible and they have weaknesses, and that they're, whether they're mentally or physically ill. It's a really frightening thing to see that, and I think that was the fear I wanted to capture. So it wasn't so much saying that like mental illness is bad, it's that it is a frightening thing for you to perceive as a young person when it's somebody you love and you don't know really how to help them or what to do in that situation. So, that's where the fear is being drawn out of. So it was important that we tried to get that right. So I'm glad you thought we did.
Actually, touching on that as well, Carolyn, I suppose I was a bit curious about where you drew from in terms of your performances, in terms of sources. Was it kind of, were you more interested in the psychological aspect of it, or were you looking to say other horror performances, or where did you kind of draw that inspiration from, I suppose?
I suppose I drew it from a few different places, like obviously, the script and Kate, you know what I mean? I think the most important thing is listening to the writer and the director, who happen to be the one person. Do you know what I mean? It's their story, and you want to be able to tell it in the way that they would like it to be portrayed. So I got, Kate sent me a bit of source material in terms for kind of one aspect of the character that I play. And that was extremely helpful. And also in terms of, I suppose, Angela, the woman, I drew a lot from my own experience, like I think on a spectrum, we all experience these difficulties. We all experience these choices in life and how we behave, you know what I mean? So I could draw a lot of that from personal experience, but there was a very clear line, as Kate mentioned there, in terms of these two characters that, that one of them is very clearly, not kind of fighting or combating, in terms of mental health. It's clear that this is where the horror comes from, you know what I mean? So it was lovely getting that kind of differentiation and being able to go from there. So yeah, like, Kate was amazing for sending some source material of kind of the tone of one of the characters, and then also, with the other, very much able to relate quite clearly to Angela. Yeah.
I was wondering about both of your thoughts on horror as a genre in general, because I know that there are like kind of a few actors and filmmakers out there who don't necessarily like watching horror movies, but they still enjoy making them, if that makes sense.
Well, I love watching horror movies. I'm a very big horror nerd, so I watch everything I can get my hands on in terms of horror, and even reading kind of horror novels and all that kind of stuff. I've always been drawn to the spooky things since I was a kid. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know why. I always ask myself, but I can't put my finger on it. But no, I love horror very much. I have a great respect for the genre, and I think it's brilliant. It's a very exciting cinema, I think it makes.
I grew up absolutely loving horror. I think it was my favorite. I think it was my favorite genre. You know what I mean? I think as I grew, I didn't grow out of it, but didn't watch it to the same extent as I did when I was a kid. But I think that, from working in it with Kate and things, it's reignited this interest for horror. And it has made me go back and go, when did I ever stop, watching it and reading it to the extent that I did when I was a kid. So yeah, it has kind of reignited that childhood love of that fear and that horror. So yeah.
Were there particular horror movies, actually, Kate, that you kind of drew from for inspiration for this movie? Because I suppose, like, you can't help but, like, there are certain moments that you kind of think of the classics, like something like The Exorcist or Psycho, even if it did make its way into this movie, subconsciously, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, there's loads. Because the film is very much rooted in the protagonist's point of view, so Char's point of view, a lot of our visual language for the film was inspired by a film like Rosemary's Baby, for example, because that's, how the camera shows you things in that movie was very similar to what we wanted to do. Like, the audience only really ever sees things through Shar and through her perceiving the world. So that was kind of something we drew from in kind of visual language. I think as well, Candyman from 1992 was the reference because that takes a kind of folk horror in a way and stages it in a very modern urban setting for the time. So that was something, because we obviously wanted to depict modern Dublin and for it to feel like Dublin and a more urban setting, I suppose, than you might be used to for kind of folk horror. So that was definitely a reference to. I think, as you said, The Exorcist definitely was a reference to one of my favorite movies. And I think what The Exorcist does really interesting is it really grounds the audience at the beginning by presenting the world in a very real way. It almost feels documentary style sometimes at the start of The Exorcist, that you feel like you're very much in a real place and a real time, and it just feels like the real world. And that was something that we definitely wanted to do with the start of the film, before we kind of bring in the more supernatural elements or the more kind of fantastical, that you feel grounded, that you feel like this is a real family that live in this house. And, that was really important kind of stylistically.
And for yourself, Carolyn, I'm really curious about the hair and makeup. Like, oh my gosh, it's just, I love a horror with practical effects. I hate when it gets like too sucked into the CGI. And I mean, your physical transformation in this movie, hopefully that's not giving too much away, but it is quite extraordinary. And I wonder, how was that for you? Like, how long did that take? And how much of that performance, was kind of you and like not a stand-in, and how did that work out in terms of the hair, makeup, practical effects, that kind of end of things?
Yeah, like the two women, Madonna Bambino and Roisin Condon, were responsible for all of that wonderful makeup. I loved it. It took, I can't actually remember how long it took. It took a while. But they're fabulous company. So you just chat to them and the time flew, and I could still have a coffee. You know what I mean? I still had my mouth. So it was grand. But in terms of, I think I said this before, that I kind of forgot it was on sometimes. And, for a couple of particular scenes, it wasn't until I would see the response from other people that I would kind of remember that it was on, and that I was looking like that. And then, I found Hazel's response to how I physically appeared really fed, my performance, because I can't see it. I can feel it. I can, embody it as much as possible. But I fed off Hazel more so than myself. But they did an amazing job, those two women. So fair play to them. Yeah. I think over in Toronto, sorry, Kate.
No, go ahead. I was just saying, yeah, sorry. Like when you, like, Carolyn would be like in her full makeup, and like you just like turn around and she'd be like standing behind you, like holding a coffee, and like you'd get such a fright because she'd just be like looking so freaky, and then she'd just be like, "Hi," and you'd be like, "Oh yeah." Yeah,
I think on one of the days, it was one of the shoots when I was in that full makeup, it was Hazel's birthday, and I ran over to somebody at one stage who had the cupcakes going, "Oh, can I have one?" And they were like, it was gas. But I do remember in Toronto where it premiered, one of the questions from the audience, they presumed that the makeup was CGI. You know what I mean? That it was that effective. Do you know what I mean? So it's just a compliment to Madonna and Roisin for the work that they did. They did an incredible job.
Speaking of Hazel, actually, how did both of you guys find working with her? Because I mean, she's such an incredible talent. Like, I'm seeing her in more and more like movies and TV series and everything now. She's brilliant, I think.
Yeah, she's such a pain though. No, I'm joking.
Glad she's not here.
No, Hazel is literally like, she's kind of amazing. Like, she's, she was 18 going on 19. It was her birthday during the shoot. And when we filmed, I'm like, it's kind of like speaking to somebody who's like in their 60s in terms of wisdom. Like, she's so kind of level-headed and dedicated and just has such a natural acting talent. Like, she can really just embody something, a really complex emotion, and really get that across through very little dialogue. Like she doesn't have very much dialogue in the film at all. And, you know, I think she just does that so brilliantly. And she's such a lovely person to work with, just like an absolutely really sweet person. So just a joy to be around, great laugh. Like I'd love to work with her again in the future. Absolutely. Without a doubt.
Oh, listen, like you can't say enough good things about her. She's just absolutely fabulous. And, you know, we were really lucky, you know, that we, like herself and myself, in terms of playing, you know, mother and daughter, we got along really well. And I remember on our first day together, we were doing a car scene, and like we had our first belly laugh together. And I think that's hugely bonding when you just, somebody does it. In this instance, it was me doing something really silly, really stupid, and we just had an absolute belly laugh about it, and it just, you know, it just grounded us and just gave us a lovely, it just started a really lovely bond. And she's just an absolute pleasure to work with. I don't know how my performance would have been without her. Do you know what I mean? I think that we had a lovely symmetry together. And I think that's what she brings to everything that she's in, to be honest with you. I think that she can build that symmetry and that connection with anybody that she's in a scene with. She's fabulous. She's an incredibly talented woman, and she's 21, you know, she's incredible.
I think I'm about running out of time. So I suppose my very last question for you, and it's just something that's kind of been going around in my head a bit recently, is I've just found the whole idea of the representation of women in horror this really fascinating concept recently, because women are actually probably more to the forefront of this genre than maybe other genres, in terms of, you know, sometimes they're the heroes, sometimes they're the villains. There's this whole idea of like the concept of the final girl, which I recently did a podcast about. And I've just found it such an interesting kind of concept. And I think what's great about this movie is it explores that field and brings it another step again. So I suppose, you know, and we're seeing more talent behind the camera as well, Kate, which I think is really brilliant in terms of this genre. So I suppose I wanted to ask you both a bit about, you know, if, you know, the representation of women in horror is something that you kind of think about generally, and what you thought about it in relation to this film.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've been asked this like kind of about this a little bit. Obviously, as a female director, you're often asked about kind of roles of women in filmmaking and in horror, particularly with this film. I think like it's funny, like you're like, as a woman and as someone who grew up around lots of women, I was raised by, you know, my single mother. We lived with my grandmother when I was growing up. And just like have always been surrounded by lots of women in my life who have been very strong and complex. And, you know, I think to me, I'm just kind of putting my experience and my people I know in my life and women I admire in my life on screen or in the scripts that I'm writing. And that's just my experience. I don't think I ever actively try to populate my scripts with women. It's just like something that naturally happens. But I think, yeah, in horror, it's what you say is really interesting. Like, I think that's really what drew me to the genre as a young person, was that it was a genre where I could watch, you know, films that I loved, and there was a female protagonist who won in the end and beat the big bad guy, or like, you know, kill the monster, or, you know, that kind of thing. And I just, I think that really just made me feel, you know, strong as a woman, and like that I could do that. And I think that was like really influenced me, for sure.
It's gas actually, because I similarly grew up with 3 sisters, no brothers. My granny lived with us our entire lives as well. Do you know what I mean? So have lived a life that is quite surrounded by women. And you know, just I suppose specifically with Kate's movie, you know, I remember we had a few conversations, and you know, we discovered in the script that there really is no mention of, you know, the male, or the you know what I mean, the any features of that in this story, because it's just. It's not to be offensive or anything, but it just wasn't necessary. This was a story about women. This was a story about generational trauma and breaking a cycle, and a young woman who is deciding that she doesn't have to relive the trauma of previous generations. And it's just really, women are just complex, beautiful, beautiful things, creatures, and we need to be witnessed a lot more. And if it's in this genre, I feel like in general we can see it across genres at the moment. I think we're having a moment and we need more of them. But in this particular movie, it's women focused, and it's I don't really know if that answers the question, but
yeah, I think as well, like in Ireland, like obviously, for the film is obviously about trauma passed on intergenerationally through, and like particularly in 3 generations of women. So like, for me, it was also inspirational, the idea of there's like a 3 goddess symbol in paganism, neo-paganism, which is like the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And it's like basically one symbol to depict the 3 women. So it's kind of saying that you are also your mother and your grandmother. You are all one. Your experience is shared. And that was really interesting to me, that like, we take on some aspects of the women who've gone before us. And I think there's like a lot of trauma for women in Irish history. And as a young woman coming of age, what do you do with that? Where do you go? How does that influence what you do and your decisions you make? So yeah, I think it's in Ireland particularly, I think it's important to kind of have those women's stories, because I think in Irish cinema maybe they have been lacking as of yet. So hopefully we'll see more of that.
Yeah, I think that's terrific. Thank you both so much for taking it the time. I think that's a gorgeous note to leave it on. And congratulations on the movie again. I'm so excited for everyone to see it.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Deirdre. Cheers.
Yeah, very great questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
It's not your mother up there. If we don't do something, we'll never get her back. And then they'll try to take you.
Dance with me, Shar. Ma'am, stop. Shar. Shar.
How is your mum?